The proud, almost proprietary, smile on my wife, Beatrice's, face as our son, Leo, walked across the graduation stage to receive his university diploma was a masterpiece of maternal devotion, a performance she had honed to perfection over 2 decades of carefully curated social appearances. My name is Thomas Albright, 59 years old, and for the better part of 30 years, I have been a senior partner at a firm specializing in forensic accounting, a profession that has given me a perhaps unhealthy, but undeniably useful, skepticism towards any performance that seems too perfect. As the applause for Leo, who had graduated with high honors, began to subside, Beatrice turned to me, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly at the edges. "Thomas, darling," she began, her voice a low, confidential purr that immediately set my internal alarms ringing. "Now that Leo is officially launched, now that our primary parental duties are complete, I believe it's time for us to have a serious discussion about our own futures." Separately, the pronouncement, delivered with the cool, matter-of-fact precision of a CEO announcing a corporate restructuring, was not entirely unexpected. The foundations of our marriage had been showing signs of significant structural stress for years, a series of hairline cracks I had been quietly, methodically documenting. But the timing, the sheer cold-blooded audacity of choosing our only son's graduation ceremony as the venue for this declaration of marital redundancy, was breathtaking. I looked at Leo, now making his way back towards us, his face alight with the pure, unadulterated joy of a young man on the cusp of his future, entirely oblivious to the fact that the foundations of his own family were, at that very moment, being summarily and unilaterally condemned. A cold, hard anger, the kind I usually reserved for a particularly egregious case of corporate fraud, began to solidify within me. Beatrice saw my gaze shift to Leo, and a flicker of something, caution, a belated sense of maternal propriety, crossed her features. "Not now, of course, Thomas," she added hastily, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Later, at the celebratory dinner tonight, we will present a united front for Leo's sake. It's important to maintain appearances. Appearances, the guiding principle of Beatrice's entire existence. The meticulously maintained house in the respectable suburb, the membership at the right country club, the son with the prestigious degree, the husband with the husband whose primary function, I was beginning to realize, had been to provide the stable, if from her perspective, rather boring, financial bedrock upon which her carefully constructed edifice of social standing was built. Now that our son, her primary exhibit of successful motherhood, was launched, the bedrock, it seemed, was being deemed superfluous to requirements. What Beatrice, in her arrogant, self-absorbed certainty, did not know was that her boring, predictable, forensic accountant husband had not just been documenting the cracks in our marriage. I had been quietly, and with a considerable degree of legal and financial foresight, preparing for this very eventuality. For the past 5 years, ever since Beatrice had fallen under the spell of a charismatic and ruinously expensive wealth guru named Julian Thorne, a man who preached a gospel of unlimited personal growth and manifesting one's true financial destiny, a destiny that seemed to invariably involve his followers liquidating their marital assets and investing in his own dubious offshore ventures. I had been engaged in my own quiet, methodical process of asset protection. My inheritance from my late parents, a not insignificant portfolio of blue-chip stocks and commercial property, had, with the help of my astute solicitor, Alastair Finch, been carefully ring-fenced within a series of legally unassailable family trusts that Beatrice had, with her usual dismissive disdain for boring financial paperwork, signed off on years ago without a second glance. My own personal investments, my pension, the very assets she likely saw as the glittering prize at the end of this marital rainbow, were largely, and to a degree she could not possibly comprehend, beyond her reach. The celebratory dinner she was planning for Leo, the one at which she intended to formally, and I had no doubt, with a certain triumphant flair, announce the end of our marriage, was indeed about to be the scene of a rather significant announcement about a new beginning. But it would not be the one she was anticipating. I had my own presentation prepared. A small, elegant, and I suspected deeply unwelcome graduation gift for Beatrice herself. A gift that would demonstrate, with the cold, hard, irrefutable clarity of a perfectly balanced ledger, the true state of our shared accounts, and the rather limited nature of the new future she so confidently envisioned for herself. "Of course, my dear," I replied, my voice a mask of calm, weary acquiescence, as Leo approached, his face beaming. "A united front. For Leo's sake. Whatever you think is best." Beatrice smiled, a small, triumphant smile of a woman who believes she holds all the cards. She had no idea that the deck had been stacked, the game had been analyzed, and the final accounting was about to be presented, not by her, but by the quiet, unassuming, and profoundly underestimated forensic accountant she had so foolishly mistaken for a mere spectator in her own life's grand, and soon-to-be, rather dramatically downsized drama. The graduation dinner would indeed be a celebration of a new beginning. My new beginning. My marriage to Beatrice had been, from its inception, a union of opposites, a merger of two entirely different corporate cultures, if you will. I was the cautious, analytical investor, a man who believed in due diligence, in long-term growth, in the quiet, cumulative power of compound interest. Beatrice was the speculative day trader, all high-risk, high-reward ventures, driven by emotion, by intuition, by the seductive allure of the next big thing. For a time, in the early years, our differences had been a source of a certain complementary energy. I provided the stability, the security, the solid financial foundation. She provided the social grace, the ambition, the glittering facade that allowed us to move with ease through the upper echelons of our city's social strata. We were, in a way, a successful, if somewhat emotionally detached, partnership. Leo's birth had, for a time, provided a shared project, a joint venture into which we had both invested our love and our resources, albeit in different ways. I had focused on providing for his future, on establishing educational trusts, on ensuring his long-term security. Beatrice had focused on the more public-facing aspects of his upbringing, the right schools, the right social clubs, the carefully curated friendships with the children of her influential acquaintances. The first serious signs of a fundamental, irreparable, structural flaw in our partnership had appeared about 5 years ago, with the arrival of Julian Thorne. Thorne, a man whose charisma was as undeniable as his ethics were questionable, was a self-proclaimed wealth architect, a guru who preyed upon the anxieties and aspirations of affluent, middle-aged women, promising them a path to spiritual and financial sovereignty. Beatrice, then entering a period of existential ennui as Leo prepared to leave for university, had been a prime target. Thorne's message of reclaiming one's personal power, of breaking free from limiting financial structures, a clear euphemism for marital assets controlled by cautious, actuary-minded husbands, had resonated deeply with her. She had begun attending his expensive weekend seminars, then his even more ruinously expensive week-long retreats in exotic locales. Our joint accounts, which I had always managed with a transparent, if conservative, hand, began to show a series of increasingly alarming and largely unexplained withdrawals. Payments to Thorne Global Enterprises, to Sovereignty Seminars Incorporated, to a series of other, equally vacuous-sounding corporate entities, all linked, I discovered through my own discreet forensic accounting, to Julian Thorne's labyrinthine financial network. My attempts to discuss this with Beatrice had been met with a new, almost vitriolic hostility. I was controlling, I was unsupportive, I was operating from a scarcity mindset. I was blocking her energetic flow of abundance. The jargon was as impenetrable as it was infuriating. It became clear that Thorne was not just her guru. He was her co-conspirator, her partner in a new, and from my perspective, deeply fraudulent, enterprise, the systematic dismantling of our shared financial life for her sole benefit, and, I suspected, for Thorne's considerable profit. It was then that I had contacted Alastair Finch, my solicitor, a man whose understanding of forensic accounting and asset protection was second to none. "Thomas," Alistair had said, after I had laid out the situation, his expression grim. You are dealing with a classic case of predatory financial influence. This Thorne character is a parasite, and your wife, I'm afraid, is his willing host. We need to take immediate and decisive steps to firewall your personal assets and to protect the integrity of your grandfather's trust before she and he can inflict any further damage. And so, Project Ledger, as I had privately termed it, had begun. Over the next few years, with Alistair's expert guidance, I had meticulously and entirely legally restructured my financial world. My significant inheritance from my own parents, which Beatrice had always viewed as part of our communal pot, was formally and irrevocably sequestered into a series of discretionary trusts for the benefit of Leo and my future grandchildren. My own investment portfolio was transferred to a new, entirely separate, holding company, its ownership structure deliberately opaque. The marital assets, the ones Beatrice believed constituted the entirety of our wealth, were in fact only the tip of a far larger, and now largely inaccessible to her, financial iceberg. I had also begun to quietly document every one of her suspicious transactions, every one of her evasive answers, every one of her Thorne-inspired pronouncements about her impending financial sovereignty. I had built a case, a meticulous, unassailable, forensic record of her financial infidelity and her clear, premeditated intent to defraud me. The final piece of the puzzle had been a discreet investigation Alistair had commissioned into Julian Thorne himself. The results had been unsurprising. Thorne had a long and sordid history of similar entanglements, a string of divorced and financially depleted women in his wake. He was a professional predator, a master of emotional and financial manipulation, a man whose wealth architecture was built on a foundation of other people's life savings. All of this evidence, this comprehensive audit of Beatrice's betrayal and Thorne's predatory influence, now resided in a slim, elegant, leather-bound folder in my briefcase, a folder I intended to present to Beatrice at Leo's celebratory graduation dinner. Not as an act of revenge, not entirely, but as an act of final accounting, a clear, factual, and legally binding presentation of the true state of our affairs, and of her own, now significantly more modest, future. Beatrice's plan to announce our separation at the dinner was, from her perspective, a power play, a public declaration of her independence, her victory. She believed she was seizing control of the narrative of her future, of my wealth. She had no idea that the narrative had already been written, the future already secured, the wealth already protected. She was playing a game of checkers, a game of emotional, impulsive moves. I, the quiet, boring forensic accountant, had been playing a long, patient, and entirely different game of chess. And her queen, the one she believed to be so powerful, so unassailable, had just stepped directly and irrevocably into my checkmate. The graduation dinner, I reflected with a grim, internal satisfaction, would indeed be a celebration of a new beginning. But the guest of honor at that new beginning would not be my wife. It would be my own, hard-won, and meticulously protected financial and personal sovereignty. The restaurant Beatrice had chosen for Leo's graduation dinner was, predictably, the most expensive, most ostentatiously fashionable establishment in the city. It was a place designed to be seen in, a stage for the public performance of affluence and status, a perfect venue for the drama she intended to unfold. Our table, a large, circular one in a semi-private alcove, was filled with a carefully curated selection of family and a few of Leo's close university friends. My brother-in-law, Gerald, and his wife, Cynthia, were there, their expressions a familiar blend of smug self-satisfaction and a faint, almost imperceptible curiosity about the impending announcement, which Beatrice had clearly, if vaguely, hinted at. Leo, bless his heart, was the only one at the table who seemed genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. He was seated between me and Beatrice, his face alight with the joy of his achievement, chattering excitedly about his plans for graduate school, entirely oblivious to the undercurrents of tension that were swirling around him like a toxic, invisible miasma. Through the first two courses, a series of exquisitely presented but ridiculously small portions of food, Beatrice played the part of the proud, devoted mother to perfection. She lauded Leo's achievements. She charmed his friends. She presided over the table with a regal, if slightly strained, grace. She was waiting, I knew, for the opportune moment for the lull after the main course, just before dessert, the traditional time for celebratory toasts and significant family announcements. As the waiters cleared the plates from our main course, a piece of artfully arranged sea bass that had looked more like a watercolor painting than a meal, Beatrice caught my eye, a small, almost imperceptible nod, a signal that the performance was about to reach its climax. She then tinkled her crystal water glass with a fork, a sound that immediately silenced the polite murmur of conversation at our table. "My dears," she began, her voice imbued with a carefully rehearsed emotion, her gaze sweeping over the assembled guests before finally, and with a touch of theatrical pity, coming to rest on me. "As you all know, we are here tonight to celebrate a wonderful milestone in our dear Leo's life. A graduation, an ending of one chapter and the beginning of another." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a silk napkin. "And it seems," she continued, her voice dropping to a more intimate, confidential tone, "that this is a time for new beginnings for others in our family as well. Thomas and I, after much soul-searching and with a great deal of sadness, have decided that our own journey together has come to an end. We will be separating, pursuing our own individual paths to personal fulfillment." A collective, if not entirely surprised, gasp went through her side of the family. Leo's friends looked deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. Leo himself stared at his mother, his earlier joy evaporating, his face a mask of stunned, hurt disbelief. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. What are you talking about?" Beatrice reached out and patted his hand, her expression one of sorrowful, maternal concern. "It's for the best, darling. Your father and I, we've simply grown apart. We want different things from life now. But we both love you very, very much. And nothing," she added, her gaze now flicking towards me, a silent, almost threatening challenge, "will ever change that." This was my cue. The moment I had been preparing for. The moment when I was expected to play my part in her carefully scripted drama, the part of the sad, defeated, but ultimately compliant husband. I did not disappoint her. Not entirely. I rose slowly to my feet, my own expression one of sober, regretful acquiescence. "Beatrice is right, Leo," I said, my voice calm, steady. "Your mother and I have indeed reached a point of divergence, and a new beginning is inevitable." I then turned to Beatrice, a small, almost sad smile on my face. "And in the spirit of these new beginnings, my dear," I continued, "I have a small graduation gift for you as well. A sort of severance package, to use your own rather charming terminology. A token to assist you on your new path to personal fulfillment and financial sovereignty." From my briefcase, which had been resting discreetly by my chair, I withdrew the slim, leather-bound folder Alastair Finch had so meticulously prepared. The folder containing the comprehensive and entirely damning forensic audit of her financial activities for the past 5 years. I placed it on the table in front of her, next to her half-eaten dessert, a confection of sponge sugar and existential disappointment. What is this, Thomas?" she asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and a dawning, uneasy apprehension. "This, Beatrice," I replied, my voice still quiet but now carrying a new, unmistakable edge of authority, "is a detailed accounting of your own, rather extensive severance package, the one you have been systematically awarding yourself from our joint assets for the past several years, largely for the benefit of Mr. Julian Thorne and his various philanthropic enterprises. It's a fascinating document. It details misappropriated funds, undisclosed accounts, and a series of transactions that our solicitor, Mr. Finch, believes the financial authorities might find of considerable interest." The color drained from her face. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of shock and stark, unadulterated terror, were fixed on the folder as if it were a coiled serpent. Her brother-in-law, Gerald, and his wife, Cynthia, who had been listening with smug, almost gleeful interest, now looked deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. Leo stared from the folder to his mother's ashen face, his own expression a mixture of hurt and a dawning, horrified comprehension. "This document," I continued, my voice now like chipped ice, "also contains a copy of the legal agreement regarding the Albright Family Trust, the one you signed but clearly never read, which firewalls my own, personal and inherited, assets from precisely this kind of unilateral corporate restructuring. And finally," I added, delivering the coup de grace, "it contains a formal settlement offer, drafted by Mr. Finch. An offer that is considerably less generous than you might have anticipated, but one that is, I assure you, entirely equitable given the circumstances. An offer that is, I should add, non-negotiable, and contingent on your immediate and permanent cessation of all contact with Mr. Julian Thorne, and your full cooperation in any subsequent legal inquiries into his rather creative business practices." I then paused, letting the full, devastating weight of my words settle into the suddenly very silent, very tense atmosphere of the private dining room. "So, yes, Beatrice," I concluded, my gaze meeting hers, my voice now devoid of any emotion save a profound, weary finality. "You are right. This is a new beginning, but it is not the one you planned. Welcome, my dear, to your new, and I suspect, significantly more modest reality." The graduation dinner had indeed concluded with a life-altering announcement. But the graduate and the terms of that new life were not at all what she, or anyone else at that table, had ever expected. The forensic accountant had, at last, presented his final, unassailable report. And the books, after years of fraudulent entries, were finally and irrevocably being balanced. The immediate aftermath of my quiet but devastating presentation was a scene of almost comical, if deeply pathetic, disarray. Beatrice, my wife, stared at the leather-bound folder as if it were a portal to some unimaginable hell, her face a mask of slack-jawed, incredulous horror. Her earlier performance of sorrowful dignity had evaporated, leaving behind the raw, ugly reality of a thwarted predator. My brother-in-law, Gerald, who had been smirking with ill-concealed delight at Beatrice's initial announcement, now looked as though he had swallowed a particularly large and indigestible fishbone. His wife, Cynthia, was studiously examining the intricate pattern of her dessert fork. Leo's friends, caught in the crossfire of this brutal domestic warfare, seemed to be collectively trying to will themselves invisible. And Leo, my poor, dear son, simply looked heartbroken, the joyous celebration of his academic triumph irrevocably poisoned by this sudden, public revelation of his parents' fractured and apparently fraudulent union. It was Beatrice who finally broke the spell, her voice a ragged, desperate whisper. You can't do this, Thomas. This is our life, our shared assets. You can't just take them away from me." "I'm not taking anything, Beatrice," I replied, my voice still calm, almost clinical. "I am merely protecting what is legally and rightfully mine from your and Mr. Thorne's rather enthusiastic attempts at misappropriation. The assets held within the Albright Family Trust, my inherited wealth, my personal investment portfolio, these were never, as you well know, or as you would have known had you ever bothered to read the legal documents you so blithely signed, part of our shared marital property. They were, and remain, entirely separate." I gestured towards a folder. "As for our legitimate marital assets, the ones we built together, this settlement offer provides for a fair and equitable division. A division, however, that takes into full account the significant and unauthorized withdrawals you have made over the past 5 years to fund your journey of self-actualization, a journey that seems to have led you directly into the offshore bank accounts of a known confidence trickster." Her face crumpled. The mention of Julian Thorne, of the forensic accounting, of the undeniable paper trail that led from our joint accounts to his, seemed to extinguish the last vestiges of her fighting spirit. She knew she was caught. The evidence was too clear, too comprehensive, too factual. There was no room for her usual emotional manipulations, no crevice for her self-serving narratives to take root. Richard, my brother-in-law, not my brother, as I had misspoken in a previous, more agitated recollection of a different family drama. Ever the opportunist, seemed to be rapidly reassessing his own position in this new, altered landscape. His earlier solidarity with Beatrice was clearly evaporating. "Well, now, Beatrice," he began, his tone shifting from one of smug complicity to one of cautious, self-preserving distance. "If what Thomas is saying is true, if you've been involved with this Thorne fellow in some questionable financial dealings, well, that's a matter for you and your solicitors, isn't it? Nothing to do with the rest of us." His wife, Cynthia, nodded vigorously in agreement, a silent, swift act of familial abandonment that was almost beautiful in its ruthless efficiency. Beatrice stared at them, her eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. The horror of realizing that her allies, her co-conspirators in the quiet, long-running campaign to diminish and exploit me, were now, in the face of their own potential exposure, deserting her with a speed that was as breathtaking as it was predictable. The united front she had so confidently presented at the beginning of the evening had crumbled into a every-man-for-himself scramble for the lifeboats. It was Leo, my son, who finally brought the excruciating scene to a close. He rose slowly from his seat, his young face pale but resolute. He looked at his mother, his expression not one of anger, but of a profound, heart-wrenching sadness. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet but clear, I think Dad and I should go now. This isn't a celebration anymore." He then turned to me. "Dad, can we go home?" I stood up immediately, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Of course, son. Of course we can." I then turned to Beatrice, to her brother, to his wife, a final, quiet pronouncement on my lips. "Beatrice," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion save a profound, weary finality. "You have until noon tomorrow to have your solicitor contact Mr. Alastair Finch and accept the terms of the settlement offer. If you do not, Mr. Finch has been instructed to immediately forward his entire file, including the rather detailed report on your and Mr. Thorne's financial arrangements, to the relevant authorities. The choice, as always, is yours, but I would advise you to choose wisely." And with that, I escorted my son from the room, leaving Beatrice alone amidst the ruins of her grand ambitions, her celebratory dinner, her marriage, and her carefully constructed life. The united front she had so confidently presented for Leo's sake had indeed been maintained, just not in the way she had ever envisioned. It had been the united front of my son and me, standing together against her deceit, her greed, her profound, and ultimately self-destructive betrayal. The drive home was a quiet one. Leo stared out the window at the city lights, his own bright future now unexpectedly and unfairly clouded by the fallout from his parents' failed union. I didn't press him to talk. I simply let the silence be a space for him to process, to grieve. When we finally pulled into our own driveway, he turned to me, his eyes filled with a question that was both heartbreakingly simple and profound. "Dad," he asked, his voice small, are we going to be okay?" I looked at my son, at this wonderful, intelligent, and deeply kind young man, the one true, unassailable asset in my life's ledger. And I felt a surge of love, of fierce, paternal protection that was more powerful than any legal document, any financial settlement. "Yes, Leo," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I no longer try to suppress. "Yes, we are. We're going to be absolutely, unequivocally okay. I promise you." The forensic accountant had closed his most difficult, most personal case. The father now had a new, and far more important, project to manage. The careful, loving, and entirely honest reconstruction of his son's world. A world that would, from this day forward, be built on a foundation of unshakable truth and an even more unshakable fatherly love. The aftermath of Leo's ill-fated graduation dinner was a period of quiet, meticulous, and from my perspective, deeply satisfying disentanglement. Beatrice, my now and forever ex-wife, faced with the irrefutable evidence of her financial infidelity and the very real threat of a criminal investigation into her and Julian Thorne's activities, capitulated completely. Her solicitor, after a single, brief, and reportedly rather chastened phone call with Alastair Finch, accepted the terms of our settlement offer without a single counterproposal. The divorce was expedited, the legal paperwork executed with a brisk, impersonal efficiency that I found immensely comforting. The final division of our legitimate marital assets was, as I had stipulated, fair, but it was a fairness predicated on a rigorous, forensic accounting of Beatrice's 5-year spending spree. The funds she had siphoned off to Thorne's various phantom enterprises were deducted from her share, as were the costs of the numerous extravagant and entirely unilateral lifestyle upgrades she had made during that period. The result was a settlement that left her with a comfortable, but by no means lavish, financial foundation for her new life, a foundation she would now be solely responsible for managing or mismanaging as she saw fit. Julian Thorne, the charismatic wealth architect, vanished from her life with a speed that was almost comical, stripped of his access to my family's wealth, and with the shadow of a potential fraud investigation now looming over him, he apparently decided that his spiritual and financial sovereignty was best pursued in a different and preferably non-extraditable jurisdiction. Last I heard, he was plying his trade in some sun-drenched, regulation-light island nation, no doubt already cultivating a new flock of wealthy, dissatisfied, and gullible disciples. My brother-in-law, Gerald, and his wife, Cynthia, in a masterclass of familial self-preservation, quickly and comprehensively distanced themselves from Beatrice, their former ally in the court of family opinion. They offered me a series of awkward, insincere apologies for their lack of awareness of the true situation, their primary concern clearly being the preservation of their own access to the remaining and now considerably more consolidated Albright family trust. I accepted their apologies with a cool, polite detachment. I had no interest in their friendship, but for the sake of a quiet life and for Leo's access to his cousins, I was willing to maintain a facade of civil, if not particularly warm, relations. My primary focus, however, was Leo. The public implosion of his parents' marriage, at what should have been one of the proudest moments of his young life, had been a brutal blow. But Leo, to his immense credit, possessed a quiet resilience, a core of inner strength that I had perhaps underestimated. We talked, at length, honestly and openly, about what had happened. I explained in age-appropriate terms the nature of his mother's actions, not to demonize her, but to provide him with a factual framework for understanding the complex and often disappointing realities of adult relationships. I reassured him, repeatedly, that he was in no way responsible for our separation and that both his parents, despite our profound differences, loved him unconditionally. Slowly, with the help of a good therapist and the unwavering support of his friends and his loving, and now significantly less dysfunctional, father, Leo began to heal. He threw himself into his postgraduate studies in theoretical physics, his brilliant mind finding a welcome refuge in the elegant certainties of the cosmos, a world so different from the messy, irrational chaos of his own family's recent history. He excelled, his work earning him a prestigious fellowship at a renowned research institute, the first step in what I knew would be a long and distinguished career. As for me, my life, stripped of the constant, low-grade stress of my marriage to Beatrice, found a new, more peaceful, and infinitely more authentic rhythm. I continued my work as a forensic accountant, but I also made more time for my own passions. My garden, my collection of antique maps, my long-postponed attempt to learn to play the cello. I found a quiet, satisfying joy in a life defined not by external expectations or social obligations, but by my own quiet interests, my own values. One cool autumn afternoon, about a year after the divorce, I was in my study when I received an unexpected and rather hesitant phone call. It was from Beatrice. Her voice, once so confident, so commanding, was now small, almost fragile. She did not ask for money. She did not make excuses. She simply, and with a sincerity that surprised me, asked how Leo was doing. We spoke for a few minutes, a stilted but civil conversation about our son's achievements, his future plans. And then, just before she hung up, she said, her voice barely a whisper, "You were a good husband, Thomas. A good, steady man. I was a fool. I hope one day Leo can forgive me. And perhaps even you." It was not a full apology, not a comprehensive accounting of her betrayals. But it was something, a flicker of self-awareness, a crack in the armor of her lifelong entitlement. It did not change the past. It did not heal all the wounds. But it was perhaps a sign that even the most compromised of personal ledgers can, with time, with consequence, with a great deal of painful self-reflection, begin the slow, arduous process of being reconciled. My own books, I reflected as I hung up the phone, were at last well and truly balanced. The risks had been assessed, the liabilities contained, the assets secured. And the future for me and for my remarkable son was a clean, open page, its narrative no longer defined by the fraudulent entries of the past, but by the limitless possibilities of a new and entirely authentic beginning. The forensic accountant, at last, was at peace. The years that followed were a testament to the quiet, enduring power of a life rebuilt on a foundation of integrity. Leo, my son, completed his doctorate in theoretical physics with distinction, his work on quantum entanglement earning him a coveted postdoctoral position at the CERN laboratory in Switzerland. His letters and calls, filled with a brilliant, infectious enthusiasm for the mysteries of the cosmos, were a constant source of joy and pride for me. He had found his passion, his purpose, a world of elegant certainties and profound questions that dwarfed the petty, earthbound dramas of his family's past. He married a fellow physicist, a wonderful, intelligent woman who shared his passion and his quiet, thoughtful nature. Their partnership was one of mutual respect and intellectual camaraderie, a world away from the toxic, transactional dynamic he had witnessed in his own parents' marriage. They were, in every sense of the word, a team. My own life, in the quiet years of my semi-retirement, settled into a comfortable, fulfilling rhythm. I took on occasional consulting work, specializing in uncovering complex financial fraud, my skills as a forensic accountant more in demand than ever in an increasingly complex global economy. But my true passion became philanthropy. The Albright Family Trust, now securely under my stewardship, was repurposed. I established a significant educational foundation in my parents' name, ironically, but also, I felt appropriately, endowing chairs in both business ethics and theoretical physics at our old university, a quiet, posthumous reconciliation of their values and mine. Beatrice, my ex-wife, lived out her life in quiet obscurity. Her attempts to re-enter the social world she had once so dominated were, by all accounts, unsuccessful. Her name had become a cautionary tale, a symbol of hubris and betrayal. She maintained a distant, if not entirely severed, connection with Leo, their interactions confined to polite, infrequent phone calls and carefully worded birthday cards. He treated her with a cool, respectful kindness, a testament to his own character rather than to hers. She never asked for more money, either from him or from me. The settlement and the humiliating exposure of her actions seemed to have, at last, instilled in her a hard one, if unwelcome, sense of financial reality. One day, many years after our separation, I received a small, unexpected package in the mail. It was from Beatrice. Inside, there was no letter, no explanation. Just a single, beautifully bound, first edition of a classic work on celestial mechanics, a book I had once mentioned, in passing, that I had always wanted for my collection. It was an extravagant and entirely uncharacteristic gesture. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Was it a peace offering? A belated apology? A final, desperate attempt at connection? Or simply a recognition, at the end of her life, of the value of the quiet, intellectual world she had so long derided? I never found out. She passed away a few months later, quietly, in her small, respectable apartment. Leo and I attended her funeral, a small, sparsely attended affair. My brother-in-law, Gerald, and his wife, Cynthia, were there, looking older, grayer, their own lives a testament to a kind of quiet, unfulfilled suburban mediocrity. They offered me a brief, awkward nod of acknowledgement. The old battles were long over. The old resentments faded into a kind of weary, mutual irrelevance. As I stood by her graveside, I felt not anger, not even sadness, but a kind of profound, philosophical detachment. Beatrice's life had been a case study in miscalculated risk, in the pursuit of a fraudulent, unsustainable return on investment. She had gambled everything: her marriage, her relationship with her son, her own integrity, on the false promises of a charlatan and the ephemeral allure of social status. And she had lost, comprehensively. My own life, by contrast, had been a testament to the principles I had always held dear: patience, diligence, a deep respect for verifiable fact, and the quiet, cumulative power of a life built on a solid foundation of integrity. My returns had been of a different and far more enduring nature: the love of a son, the respect of my peers, the quiet satisfaction of work well done, and the peace of mind that comes from a ledger that is at last truly and irrevocably balanced. The graduation dinner, that long ago catalyst for so much pain and upheaval, now seemed like a distant, almost necessary storm. It had cleared the air, washed away the debris of a lifetime of deceit, and had allowed for the growth of something new, something stronger, something more authentic in its place. The forensic accountant had not just audited a set of flawed accounts. He had, in the process, reclaimed his own and his son's future. And that, in the final analysis, was a result that exceeded all projections, a return on investment that was, in every sense of the word, priceless.